You awake on the structure of flesh. Visions of dragons and tentacles come alive in your head. A writhing behind your eye threatens to drown out your own ambition. A creature from that of a skull leads you to the helm of the beast. Wait, hold on. A brain, like an actual brain, jumps out of a skull and proceeds to sprout legs and run around like it's the most normal thing. How is that even possible? I mean, don't get me wrong. I get this game came out a while ago, but geez, we all skipped over the literal brains of our party, huh? What's up, my fellow Intellect Devours, and welcome to Brain Rot. Now, before we get started, I know what you're thinking. Oh, another theory channel. Surely this one can't be any different from the theoretical hundreds that already exist, right? Well, as much as we applaud using past experiences and relevant knowledge to devise correlation, I'd be doing a disservice without giving props to those before us. And although plenty of channels may have inspired brain rot, I can assure you, the only theorizing we'll be doing around here are our own theories. A scientific theory! Just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Anyways, first I want to give a brief introduction. Hi, my name's BZ, and I'll be your dramatic narrator. Or just the voice you're hearing in your head, who can tell? Trick question? We can. Now I'm sure you're wondering, B, why you're bringing up all this relatively sandwich part of Baldur's Gate 3 lore that they add to the beginning of the game just for shock factor, and the general tutorial of dialogue options and how the choices affect your gameplay. Well, right you are to ask that oddly very specific question, but let me answer that question with another. Have you ever stopped to think about how a brain could grow legs and have little tentacle things just floating around? I mean, sure, I could be overthinking things and it could be purely aesthetics, but if you're watching this video, that means you're like me and spent way too long overthinking what you're looking at. So today, I want to achieve two things. Figure out how the Intellect Devours came into being, and if it's actually possible to have yourself a new brain buddy IRL. That being said, first we need to establish the rules of the universe, the overarching lore of both Baldur's Gate and the board games it hailed from, and apply those rules to real-world science. To do that, you don't have to look far. Just by going to the Forgotten Realms wiki, quote, Intellect Devours were psionic aberrations that took the form of walking brains. They were servants of the Mind Flayers and were one of the most dreaded threats of the Underdark, with their power to consume intelligence and possess host bodies. End quote. Psionic refers to anyone who's able to wield the invisible art of metapsychic abilities, like how our friend Us is able to communicate solely through thought instead of speech. Think of beings like Mewtwo in Pokemon, or the Vulcans in Star Trek, who both unironically either are or look like aliens. The wiki also tells us that these creatures are solely interested in gaining the intellect of others by any means necessary, and also don't have much of a moral compass. Most records in both the wiki, and most records I could find from the earlier games and stories, depict them as having, sometimes, a split personality, as the creature performs more than one task at once, which can often lead to split-second decisions or just dumb choices. Their words, not mine. So, not much to go on based on how these things have developed, or what they may have looked like prior to getting their metaphorical claws on a brain, so we're just gonna have to do some digging. First, we need to figure out how to classify an Intellect Devourer before it goes and pulls an Eevee. You might think this is easy, considering that it's pretty self-established in the lore that these guys are parasites of some kind, but you'd be partially incorrect due to the ungodly amount of parasites there actually are. For our purposes, we're just going to cut them down to the most basic types of parasites according to the Cleveland Clinic. There are mainly three kinds of parasites: ectoparasites, Helimus, and protozoans. Ectoparasites are your typical head lice, fleas, or ticks. These guys are little insects that survive on a human body by either biting the skin for blood or burying themselves under the skin to feast on you from the inside out. Helimus are the lesser common worm-based creatures such as tapeworms and flukes, which attack your inner organs and feed off nutrients you provide yourself every day when you eat. Flukes and roundworms specifically hail from the land of contamination. and absolutely decimate your bowels until they're physically extracted from your innards like a frickin' snake. Fun fact, the biggest one of these guys, the Diffolibetherium latum, or the fish tapeworm, can and has reached up to 30 feet or 9 meters in the human being. Yikes, talk about a danger noodle. Finally, the last guys, the protozoans, are all cell-based, with less than identifiable names. They're designed to look like small, little cells and appear like a normal occurrence in the human body to those who haven't taken a cytology or histology class. Again, these guys primarily infect organs, but they do use blood and other body fluids to move around like most cells do. It would be the equivalent of the game Not My Neighbors, except you're an erythrocyte trying to do your job with doppelgangers trying to blend in as normal cells. Just from this description, we can pretty much solidify that whatever we're dealing with isn't an ectoparasite, since the only one that could feasibly crawl under someone's skin and go to the brain wouldn't be causing the kind of tentacle-like appendages coming from the Intellect Devours. Also, take a closer look at the back of the brain around the parietal lobe and occipital lobe, down to the cerebellum. Those little slimy swirls ain't coming out of an ectoparasite, but that detail is interesting. The reason I say that is because those particular lobes of the brain are responsible for pain and sensory, but also functions like language, reading, information processing, memory, and involuntary motor functions like balance. Those areas that would feasibly hold the most intellect are where those tentacles are embedded. Speaking of which, humans in general have our own tentacles, more or less, that run from the brain down to the spine as part of our nervous system. In case you didn't know, the nervous system is what tells your brain to interact with parts of our body via electrical signals, so our brain is pretty much stuck to it. The point that I'm getting at is that whatever parasite the Intellect Devours are has to be able to enter a human spine and be able to somehow snap the brain off of the nervous tissue for the brain to pop out of the skull like we see. By this logic, that also means that it would have to weaken the skulls as well as the bone nutrients to be able to do any of that. Knowing this, let's compare our final contenders. In one corner, standing anywhere from 4.5 to 9 meters, we have the worms. In the other corner, coming in at the microscopic level, we have the protozoans. Protozoans would theoretically have a hard time getting into the spine without being pulled over by the immune cops, but the worms would take longer getting through. In real life, protozoans would win this fight hands down, but then there's the worms. In the world of Faerun, we know that most, if not all, clerics and healers can't remove the Mind Flayer parasites, which, based on their appearance, we can confidently say are a type of worm parasite. Therefore, the likelihood of being able to remove an Intellect Devourer worm should be equally impossible, whereas a simple potion could easily deal with the protozoans, or at least slow them down in their production for the worm to overtake them in a landslide. There you have it, a dramatized way of saying that the protozoans wouldn't have a chance here. No, what you thought was a brain dog from the Underdark is actually a worm infestation. But I know what you're thinking. How can a worm take control of a brain, communicate telepathically, and grow little claw-feet things? Well, think about it. We know that these things came from the Underdark, a place where most things that live there evolve and adjust on their own, and those that haven't were directly influenced by the residents and environment. Hypothetically speaking, we already know that the bullet is one such creature that evolved from living down there so long, so it makes sense that a worm of some kind would develop a lust for knowledge and be able to cause the legs and appendages and edema that we see. All of this brings up the final question. Could an Intellect Devourer feasibly be real? Short answer, kinda. You see, doctors as early as 2023 have been developing a kind of pseudoencephalal, or false brain, in labs across the world, which, thus far, have proven to function like normal developing brains, despite the questionable morale posed by press and fellow researchers. Some of these brains were either byproducts or outright inspired by certain tumors called teratomas, which have been able to sprout additional tissue and even body structures, such as teeth, hair, veins, and even eyes in the past. Pictures that I won't show on YouTube, but don't recommend looking up if you're squeamish. With enough treatment, development, and science, several have proven to develop entirely new organs altogether. In the world of Baldur's Gate, again, I wouldn't be surprised if a type of worm containing similar tumors or structures evolved to perform the same way we see here. The only difference would be that it wouldn't travel far, wouldn't have kinetic abilities, and would likely die off quickly, if not painfully. But it would be theoretically possible, given the right circumstances. So I'm gonna stamp this one theorist approved. The Intellect Devours are a type of parasitic worm that developed all on its own in the Underdark, with a lust for knowledge and a tumor to grow and infect the brains that they host so severely that they sprout animal-like appendages. It can live in that real world, just very shortly, and in a horrific amount of pain. Think about that the next time you run into a lovable brain dog just looking for pats and smelling the electricity in your brain. Maybe next time you'll consider crippling it. Until then, let your brain rot, and I'll see you in the next one. And hey, if you have any questions about the channel, or your lovely hostess, moi, don't be afraid to reach out to us in the comments. I'm always happy to clarify who I am or any of the videos we make. Have a fun week!